1, 2, 3, 4. Раз, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2.
Олена.
No, but your next name.
Макеєва. А у вас є перекладач, так? Є перекладач.
А якщо вам потрібно, так?
Мені не потрібно, але мова в мене на українській.
Там все нормально.
How are you?
Fine, great.
Doing good.
Monday.
Yeah, he's not.
It's a crucial week for us. Kyiv. Because of this.
How many euros? Yes. No, far. You're standing in I'm still waiting for a response on my proposal from the finance minister. Proposal on solving our issues on tax. Yes. Yeah.
You know, the proposal planned by the government.
Mark?
No, I mean, but you know, where about our proposal? I will present it.
Fabi, hi, how are you? Good to see you. Excellent. Okay, then we're all here.
No, Olena, nice to meet you. Special next regime for
Olena, can we start? Yeah, we've got everyone here. All right, I suggest we start, everyone, and thank you very much, and welcome back, and thanks to Olena and the team at the World Bank and everyone for having organized this. We're obviously competing with a pretty important visitor here in town today with the US Vice President Joe Biden, but I'd like to think that in some ways we are a concrete illustration. We are sort of doing some of the sort of stuff that he's talking about at a higher level with your government. We are trying to live reforms and practical concrete steps for improved management. And of course, this session is now diving in a little bit more in detail on the actual revenue management here today. And I'm supposed to sit here, but then I can't see you. But anyway, so very much welcome to our panel here. And we have here Paul Shapiro from the EBRD, Mark Pearson from the Canadian government, it's Natural Resource Management. We have Fabi Tumiva from Indonesia, from a civil society group there. And both Mark and Fabi are members of the EITI board. And we have Mark Rollins, who's the chairman of UKER NAFTA. And we have Olena Makeyeva, who is the Vice Finance Minister, not least in charge of some of these very important tax reforms that are going on here this morning. We'll begin with a few remarks by Vice Minister Makeyeva, and then we'll take a couple of quick questions to her. And then I think it's also important to make sure that we really ground this seminar in the fact that it's quite something significant that has happened. Ukraine has produced its first EITI report, and that is largely why we're here. And it has made some very significant steps through that. There is further to go. But I would therefore also like Olena Pavlenko for our Dixie group, who's of course partly hosting us here today, to make sure that she introduces a little bit more of that report so we can ground our conversation in indeed some of these concrete practical steps that are happening here, so we don't sort of drift away in all kinds of directions. Does that seem like an all right plan for the next hour or so? Excellent. Well, over to you, Vice Minister. The podium is yours.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to talk to such honored audience, and I highly appreciate everything you do to develop our Ukraine and to develop this industry. And I will switch to Ukrainian, talking about the tax reform. Отже, стратегічне реформування газовидобувної галузі полягає у, перше, створенні вільного ринку, і, друге, у створенні спеціального режиму оподаткування для цієї галузі. Це наші ключові завдання. Як ви знаєте, 1 жовтня 2015 року вступив в дію Закон України про ринок природного газу. Цей закон визначає правові засади функціонування ринку природного газу України, заснованого на принципах вільної конкуренції, належного захисту прав споживачів та безпеки постачання природного газу. Окрім того, цей закон дозволить забезпечити ціни на газ нижче міжнародного паритету протягом перехідного періоду до 2017 року і надати субсидії найбільш вразливим верствам населення, нашим споживачам, що повністю відповідає меморандуму про економічну і фінансову політику між Україною та Міжнародним валютним фондом. Вже починаючи з 1 квітня 2017 року, після завершення перехідного періоду, планується повний перехід на вільний ринок газу, що передбачає відміну державного регулювання цін, відміну органу зі спеціальними обов'язками щодо формування ресурсу природного газу для потреб побутових споживачів, а також обов'язку підприємств часткою держави реалізовувати природний газ для формування ресурсу природного газу для потреб побутових споживачів. Таким чином, політика поступового приведення цін на природний газ для побутових споживачів до ринкового рівня та скасування обов'язку державних підприємств реалізовувати газ для потреб населення надасть можливість встановити єдиний підхід в оподаткуванні, незалежно від напрямків подальшої реалізації газу. Ми розуміємо, що добувна галузь потребує спеціальний режим оподаткування. Такий режим повинен бути співставним з аналогічними режимами, що застосовуються в інших країнах аналогічної перспективності, а також сприяти розробці усіх життєвих розвідок, простим в адмініструванні як для фіскальних органів, так і для платників податків та в дотриманні. По-друге, спеціальний режим повинен забезпечити уряд стабільними надходженнями доходу упродовж усіх експлуатаційних періодів, а також збільшення частки доходів в умовах зростання прибутковості галузі. Отже, забезпечити надійність та стабільність, підвищити енергетичну незалежність України. По-третє, ми розуміємо, що такий спеціальний режим повинен бути достатньо привабливим для створення інвестиціям, для сприяння інвестиціям на поточний момент та в довгостроковій перспективі. Уряд разом з міжнародними експертами, з представниками галузі протягом 4 місяців в робочій групі розробив спеціальний режим оподаткування видобувної галузі, що має на меті удосконалити оподаткування суб'єктів господарювання, що проводять діяльність з видобутку газу для комерційних потреб. По-перше, Нашою спільною ініціативою передбачено визначення бази оподаткування газу природного за фактичною ціною реалізації, яка визначається як середня митна вартість імпортованого газу природного, що склалася у процесі його митного оформлення під час ввезення на територію країни. По-друге, наша спільна пропозиція полягає у встановленні наступних ставок оподаткування газу природного. Для суб'єктів господарювання, що здійснюють діяльність з видобутку газу для комерційних потреб, з 1 січня 2016 року пропонується суттєве зменшення ставок на ренту з 55% та 28% відповідно від глибини надр до 29,14, майже в 2 рази зниження ставок. Вже через 2 роки, з 1 січня 2018 року, наша пропозиція пропонує ще більше знизити ставки на ренту до 20% та 10% відповідно від глибини видобутку газу. Додатково, починаючи з 1 січня 2018 року, для платників, які здійснюють видобуток комерційного газу, буде запроваджені нові умови оподаткування. Зокрема, пропонується залишити незмінною ставку податку на прибуток, яка сьогодні використовується такими платниками податків, та запровадити так звану надбавку до податку на прибуток на рівні 15%. При цьому для прозорості визначення об'єкту оподаткування з податку на прибуток пропонується запровадити податкове огороджування діяльності підприємств з розвідки та видобутку газу природного за міжнародними стандартами фінансової звітності. При визначенні бази оподаткування додаткову надбавку до податку на прибуток на рівні 15% до складу витрат передбачено включення врахування капітальних інвестицій в необоротні активи, які пов'язані з розробкою, розвідкою, дорозвідкою та облаштуванням родовищ. Ми переконані, що зазначений спеціальний режим оподаткування видобувної галузі стимулюватиме подальшу розбудову потенціалу газовидобувної галузі України шляхом нарощення обсягів для забезпечення населенням газу власного видобутку. По-друге, новий режим сприятиме залученню нових інвестицій в галузь, тому що він не порівняння з іншими режимами в інших країнах. Також новий режим гарантуватиме стабільність і сприятиме підвищенню енергетичної незалежності України. Наш уряд сподівається, що у створених прозорих, зрозумілих і привабливих умовах видобувна галузь отримує необхідний поштовх для успішного розвитку, а інвестори отримують перспективні та високорентабельні проекти. І зрештою, як приватний бізнес, так і українська держава отримують прибуток від цього нового партнерства. Ці нові норми оподаткування видобувної галузі вже включені в проект податкового кодексу. Як ви знаєте, завтра під головуванням президента відбудеться Національна рада реформ, присвячена податковій реформі, на якій буде презентована компромісна модель, яка народилася під час дуже важких і тривалих перемовин між урядом та парламентом. І ми сподіваємося, що саме ця реформа буде відповідати інтересам громадян в Україні, інтересам бізнесу та інтересам держави. Дякую за увагу.
Thank you so much. I wonder, is it possible to remove this? To lift it down so we could actually, or so people can actually see the Vice Minister and so on? Yeah? Oh, you would like to use the podium? Okay. All right. The Vice, thank you very much. She has to leave quite soon because of these very intense negotiations related to the tax reforms and so on. But Vice Minister Mkeba has agreed to take a couple of brief questions related to what she's just said on tax issues. and tax reforms. So are there any questions or comments to what she just said in her address? Yes, please. And would you mind, hang on, wait.
Я представляю територіальну громаду, тобто голова цієї громади, села Сенчів,
Hang on, the microphone is, yeah.
Звичайно, нас дуже зацікавила ця організація ініціатива продовження. З якого? Та я так.
І, як сказати, дало нам надію. Яку надію? Тому що спрацьовуватиме трикутник.
No, you need to begin from the beginning, sorry.
Ага, це...
Thank you.
Так, ну ж, вибачайте, раді Бога, що так склалося. Я сказала, що представляю територіальну громаду села Сенчі Лохвицького району Полтавської області. Чому саме я сюди приїхала? Взагалі Полтавська область видобуває 40% всього газу, який видобувається в Україні. І велика його частина саме в нас в Сенчі. В нас на території Сенчанської ради знаходиться в межах 80 свердловин. І от в зв'язку з тим, що з'явилася ініціатива прозорості, у нас з'явилася надія, що ми будемо щось знати і для нас щось буде. Поки на війні вбивають миттєво, а якщо небезпечно видобувати газ на місцях, то смерть повільна. Я думаю, ви мене розумієте. В нас що річка зруйнована, сула, немає води в колодязях у багатьох, починає вона зникати і навіть в побутових свердловинах, розбиті дороги, і я можу продовжувати, і можу сказати ще й жахливіше. Так я чому зараз встала і хочу задати питання заступнику міністра. А що ж передбачається отим місцям, ви говорили про фінанси, де цей газ видобувають? Щоб ми, я хочу сказати, бо тут сидять люди інших країн, я хочу сказати, що ми патріоти, що ми проти того, щоб була війна. І робимо все для того, щоб вона закінчилася швидше. Ми хочемо давати державі газ, щоб вона була, наша країна міцна, мала перспективи нормальні. Але ж ми ще й хочемо нормально жити. А нормально жити, я думаю, все це залежить багато від нашого уряду. І так, Лохвиччина дає за рік зараз, ну так, як я читала в місцевій газеті, десь 3 мільярди гривень на рік. Але в Сенчі немає навіть гривень. На сьогодні, до кінця календарного року, не вистачає, щоб оплатити працю вихователів дитячого садка. І опалити оцей дитячий садок. Звичайно, будуть шукати по всьому Лохвицькому району, що і знайдуть. Але ні район, наша Лохвиця, нічого від видобутку не отримує. Навіть мало, дуже мало отримує і сама Полтава, Полтавська область. Будь ласка, щоб не було оцієї повільної смерті. Ми хочемо жити. В нас всі патріоти, наші жителі. І не хочуть ні бойкотувати, нічого робити. Просто нормально жити. І не треба нам дуже багато. Просто так, щоб вистачило на нормальне життя. Оце моє таке питання. Чи передбачається, чи ні, щоб на місцях залишалося щось? І ми просимо складати угоди з такими, як ми, і ми багато не запросимо.
Sure. No, thank you very much. That's clearly a very hugely important question and the need for your reforms to have quick impact are quite profound. Would you like to address that?
Дуже дякую за ваше запитання. Я хочу сказати перше, що от Вимога до прозорості видобувної галузі буде сприяти розвитку корпоративної соціальної відповідальності в тим чим іншому регіоні. На жаль, в Україні корпоративна соціальна відповідальність не розвинута, але саме міжнародні компанії, які дуже багато коштів вкладають в проекти соціальної відповідальності, будуть прикладом і для національних компаній. Що таке корпоративна соціальна відповідальність? Це розбудова регіону, де побудований основний бізнес компанії. Тому ми сподіваємося, що це буде частиною покращення умов життя в регіоні. І по-друге, в рамках децентралізації уряд робить все можливе, щоб надати місцевим бюджетам отримувати додаткові фінансові ресурси. Наш проект бюджету, який незабаром буде представлений, збільшує доходи місцевих бюджетів і в такий спосіб надає фінансовий ресурс для різних місцевих рад проводити різні інфраструктурні проекти з покращення доріг, з різні екологічні проекти, і ми сподіваємося, що так воно і буде. Тобто, зі свого боку, ми збільшуємо ресурс місцевих бюджетів, які повинні використовуватися на розбудову регіону. Дякую дуже.
Thank you. Could I just follow on a little bit on this? You're taking a number of really important reform processes. You're liberalizing the gas market and so on. When do you think that the citizens will start to see the benefits? When do you think that you will start to have more revenue that you can invest in schools and hospitals and so on?
Thank you very much for your question. In fact, we have already received the answer. When we will see the reform, it means the question, the answer is when we will see the appropriate road, the best solution for the citizen in the different regions in Ukraine. So it must be the very simple things, road, other issues, infrastructure projects, which will be used by the citizens. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much.
Остання фраза. Я не хочу лякати інвесторів.
Yeah.
Ми нормальні цілком.
We can't hear you without the microphone, madam. I suggest we continue, but thank you very much. You've raised a hugely important issue. Did I see any other questions? Here is an international one from, while we get the microphone over there, from Marike van Riet, who's the international head of the NGO umbrella Publish What You Pay.
Thank you, Jonas. I actually wanted to build on from the question of the community activist. Wanted to find out a little bit more about your tax reforms when it comes to revenue sharing schemes to local level. Because you're mentioning about corporate social responsibility. In Publish What You Pay's view, it should not only be about corporate social responsibility, but also about revenue sharing. And those revenues then need to be shared for sustainable development, precisely for the objectives that the lady is mentioning. So it would be good to find out a bit more about that.
Every year we try to spread to broaden the revenue sharing, as you told, right? And this year we will propose the additional financial revenue for the local budgets. So it's our general politic, which we follow every year. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Have we got a last question? Yes, please. Just here over on your far right, our far left. Have we got a microphone? Excellent. Is there anyone else who has a quick question here?
Владислав Дейнеко, аналітичний центр регіонального співробітництва. У мене буде до пані заступниці міністра дуже коротке, практичне питання. Якщо ми уважно почитаємо звіт, там можна знайти багато цікавої інформації, зокрема, долю нафтогазовидобувної галузі в економічному розвитку України, а саме 1,3% ВВП країни. Пані заступник міністра коротко характеризувала державну політику у цій галузі, якої уряд країни планує дотриматися, принаймні, в короткій і середньостроковій перспективі. Я би хотів почути вашу думку щодо ваше уявлення, який би відсоток або доля у ВВП країни для галузі була б достойна і реалістично досягнути, вважаючи на ті заходи, які ви плануєте запровадити? Дякую.
Дякую дуже за ваше запитання. Нафтогаз є ще й найбільшим платником податків в Україні, але наша політика якраз направлена на залучення нових інвестицій та розбудову приватного сектору видобутку газу, тому що ми переконані, що це вплине на підвищення підвищення енергетичної безпеки нашої країни. Дякую.
Thank you so much for that. Are there any quick questions from the panel to the Vice Minister before she dashes off to her next thing? If not,
Make a brief comment.
okay, bring it on.
I'd be happy to make a brief comment. I mean, I think that was an impressive speech, thank you. Very clear on all the reforms that are going on right now in Ukraine, and obviously I'm part of the industry, so I understand broadly what's happening there, especially on the gas sector. I know it's a difficult sector to balance. A large part of the industry here is state-dominated, Naftogaz being a good example, of course. And so any policy reform needs to balance the needs of the state and private investors. And I can tell you, I see the balancing between those two more than most, being in Ukronafta, which is not strictly speaking a state enterprise and also has private investors itself. So I know how difficult it is to balance the interests of very different parties. And I think actually all the gas reforms are heading definitely in the right direction, and I'm very supportive of that. I guess there's a couple of points I'd like to make that are sort of maybe two or three points. One is there's other sources of revenues that go to the state from companies, especially companies in the partially state sector like mine, which is a dividend, which go to the government. So from that perspective, I would like to see a more progressive policy around dividends, relating dividends more closely to net income of companies and their underlying profitability and liquidity. So this is a point that is very close to the heart in Ukronafta, because we lose a lot of our dividends to the state, and this doesn't allow us to reinvest in the sector, which is one of the main strategic goals that we're looking for. So this is a big problem for us. I guess the other area I'd sort of like to raise is liquids, because there's not been much done to address the liquids part of the mix. This reform is basically around gas, and I would like to see us think more progressively about tax reform in the liquid sector, so oil and condensate side. Because I think also there's a big need for investment there, and you can't attract investment when the rates are as high as they are today. And I guess a third question for me would be also about revenue sharing and transparency, as we're in the ITI sponsored or themed event, is that I think we need to think quite carefully in the sector and in the government about where you reinvest some of these revenues. And I think there needs to be, in my view, more transparency around licensing process, more investment in that process itself, more investment in the agencies that look after licensing, geological studies, the provision of data to make access to the sector, access to investments more available, if you like, and more transparent. So those are three areas where I'd like to see sort of more progressive and more reform.
Thank you very much for that. If I allow the industry to make a pitch here to the Ministry of Finance, I think I need to invite also, if you, for example, Fabi from civil society wishes to make one or quick, very brief comments before the Vice Finance Minister has to rush off.
Thank you, Jonas. I think there's a 2 points. First is that reforms the sector is not easy, and that was the experience from Indonesia. And it takes, I can say, energy, collective efforts, and consistency from the governments. You will find difficult from every front, and also the consequences of the reforms because of rising of gas price means that rising of energy price, it's also become political liabilities, and that's part of the issues. Having a more player in the sector doesn't mean that you will have effective market. It depends on the capacity of regulation, the capacity of regulators, and that's you should considered to build. Second, also in terms of the revenue from the of reform, as you mentioned, there will be more revenue coming into the governments. The question for the citizen, I think, how they will see that there will be improvement on the infrastructure, on the social spending, on the social service, how the increase of gas price actually translated into the better infrastructure and service from the government. And I think that's a key. So you have you have to show at the first place that the reforms is meaningful in terms of make the sector more efficient, more transparent, but also can give direct benefit to the people. And I think that's really a challenge, and I hope that the government can manage this. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Fabi. And then the last word from the Minister Mkiva.
Thank you very much for your comments. I fully agree with your position. You raise really the very important issue. First of all, that it's really quite difficult to provide reform in this area and simultaneously provide the special social benefits for our society. And the second, it's very important also for us to provide more progressive politic of the state, of the management of the state companies. So, and we do our best to increase the level of this management in these companies. And last but not least, I think that we have the question regarding the social benefits. It must be the question of another big conference, because really we have a lot of problems on the local level. We have to increase the partnership between the society and the government. But first of all, we have to build the trust in this area. And without trust, we can go forward. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Let's give her an applause. Is it super quick? Okay, we need a microphone then if it's, but you got to be very quick because I had promised that she would be out by now.
Дякую. Депутат обласної ради Полтавської області. Я б хотів би задати пану заступнику міністру таке питання. Скажіть, будь ласка, який відсоток від рентних платежів йде на геологорозвідувальні роботи? Тому що це якраз рента, це предназначається, якщо це бюджетом передбачено, це прямий збір на геологорозвідувальні роботи. Так що я б хотів би почути від вас особисто на наступний рік, яка буде частина в бюджеті заложена сума на геологорозвідувальні роботи. Тому що це дуже важливо для нашої країни, розвиток мінеральної сировини. Дякую.
Дуже дякую за ваше питання. На жаль, я не можу вам назвати точно суму по видатковій частині бюджету, тому що я відповідаю за дохідну частину бюджету і інший заступник міністра веде видаткову частину бюджету. Але я хочу сказати, що наша модель, яку ми розробили разом з індустрією, вона передбачає, що ті витрати, які компанія матиме на розвідку, дорозвідку, облаштування цих свердловин, вони будуть повністю враховуватися, списуватися і в такий спосіб знижувати об'єкт оподаткування податком на прибуток. Це є нашим інвестиційним, скажімо, інвестиційний інструмент для привабливості проводити розбудову газовидобувної галузі.
Я б хотів би все-таки ще точніше поставити це питання. Скільки взагалі заложено свердловин, які будуть спрямовані на геологорозвідку? Тому що я тоді вже інше так питання поставлю. Не цифру, а скільки ви свердловин? Тому що ви готуєте, безпосередньо міністерство готує цю програму.
Ну, просто це не моя компетенція. Я відповідаю за доходи.
Thank you very much, and thanks again to you, Olena. Olena, I hope that also you have given a little glance into some of the reforms at the Energy Ministry and the multi-stakeholder nature of this transparency effort, which is not just about sort of rules for transparency, but also a process that includes everyone. We recently had an EITI breakfast hosted by the finance minister of another big country implementing the ITI. And he said this, look, we have been implementing the ITI and we've realized that that way of consulting around reforms, the EITI National Commission, where all of the different stakeholders in the country are involved, that's a pretty good way to communicate and consult about reforms. And we're now at the Ministry of Finance using the EITI model also in other areas. So maybe that's something to think about. Once again, thank you very much.
А я тоді хотіла сказати останню фразу.
Please, we have many questions. You have been able to speak twice, and you will have to address...
Ми не хочемо лякати інвесторів.
No, I'm sorry. Thank you very much, and thank you. And don't take my papers when you leave. Thank you. All right, excellent. Now I'd like to invite Olena Pavlenko from Dixie Group, organizers of this, up on the podium to briefly tell us something about this EITI report that should look like this, and that I hope that most of you have had an opportunity to at least glance at.
Thank you very much. Let me switch to Ukrainian. Насправді, завтра буде офіційний запуск звіту EITI, і ми всіх запрошуємо завтра на продовження цієї конференції, де ми будемо говорити безпосередньо про цей звіт, але я можу сказати, що відповідаючи на ваше питання, шановний пане депутат, там є інформація про кількість свердловин, які зараз є в промисловій розробці, ви зможете цю інформацію там знайти. Також, насправді, я хочу звернути увагу на виступ пані Макеєвої. Чому в Україні ця тема така важлива? Між компаніями і урядом практично 1,5 року тривали дебати, якою має бути податкова ставка у видобувній галузі. І не було єдиного рішення фактично майже 1,5 роки. Звіт певною мірою дав відповідь на це питання, про те, що так, податки в Україні високі, і так їх треба знижувати. І так в нас є можливості нарощувати видобуток. І ми дуже раді, що Міністерство фінансів нарешті прийшло разом з компаніями до певного рішення, якими мають бути ці податки. Але я також маю сказати, що ми хочемо піти далі разом з Міністерством енергетики, і ми сподіваємося разом з Міністерством фінансів. І зараз ми розробляємо проект закону, який певною мірою закладає новий суспільний договір між компаніями і з одного боку, і Україною як державою, в тому числі суспільством з іншого боку. Ми пропонуємо інвесторам і компаніям краще регулювання, кращі податки, легшу роботу, заходження в Україну. І так, нам українські регіони, в принципі, не проти того, щоб там працювали компанії. Але взамін ми вимагаємо більшої прозорості, ми вимагаємо легшого доступу до даних і швидшого отримання інформації при потребі. Ми дуже сподіваємося, що цей закон, і ми будемо раді, якщо Міністерство фінансів також зацікавиться ним, допоможе встановити оцю чесну гру між, з одного боку, компаніями, з іншого боку, урядом і громадами, для того, щоб ми допомогли, з одного боку, наростити видобуток газу, але з іншого боку, щоб ми отримували легко і швидко всі цифри, всі дані, які потрібні для того, щоб бачити, що робиться в цій галузі. Дякую дуже вам за увагу.
Olena, sorry, would you mind actually, what concretely, for those that haven't seen this report, we need to sort of, what does it tell, what information is in here that is of interest and relevance for the audience, and what is not here that you hope to be there? Sure, but if we're going to talk about revenue management, I think it is important to have a slightly better concrete understanding of what EITI in Ukraine is.
Як я вже казала, EITI репорт він складається з двох частин. Перша частина – це контекстуальна. І там ви можете знайти багато інформації про те, які є гравці в українській нафтогазовій галузі, які це компанії, як вони працюють, де знаходяться основні родовища, які вони розробляють, а також скільки ці компанії платять податків в різні бюджети і різні податки. Ця вся інформація є доступна у звіті. Також цей звіт показує, як працюють, як надають інформацію насправді національні компанії, державні компанії і приватні компанії. Далеко не всі державні і приватні компанії відразу погоджувалися надавати ці дані. Тим не менше, їх вдалося зібрати, і ми сподіваємося, що наступний рік буде легший. Також цей звіт показує, наскільки насправді в нас є можливості наростити і швидко додаткові обсяги нафти і газу. У нас є досить потужні запаси нафти і газу, вони є також позначені у звіті, і в нас є досить малий відсоток видобутку станом на зараз. Це дещо менше, ніж 20 мільярдів кубічних метрів. Якщо ми правильно будемо розпоряджатися нашими ресурсами, вже за кілька років, я думаю, це 5-річний період, 7-річний період, ми можемо говорити про енергетичну незалежність України від власного видобутку. Чи цього достатньо?
Excellent, thank you very much. I think it was very helpful to just provide a little bit of that grounding, and obviously there will be more about this tomorrow. Great, good. Let's continue with the program. The next person on the program was really going to be Fabi, but given that you've already commented, should we ask Mark Pearson to go before you? Sure. Okay, that's great. So Mark Pearson from the Canadian Government, Natural Resources Canada, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jonas. I have a short slide presentation that I'll walk you through. So it's a pleasure to be here today to contribute to the resource management panel. I'd like to speak a little bit about Canada's experiences and policy development with respect to transparency. During the last 2 years, Canada has developed and implemented a new law, the Extractive Sector Transparency Measures Act. I'd like to speak a little bit about that, but before I do so, I'll get into some context. So, why is transparency so important to Canada's extractive sector? Well, Canada is a major producer and exporter in the global extractive sector, and you can see a number of statistics on this slide. Canada supplies about 5% of the world's crude oil and natural gas, and is among the largest exporters of each commodity. Canada also exports about $90 billion worth of minerals every year. However, what you may not know is Canada is also a major financial center for extractives. In 2013, Canadian stock exchanges raised more than 60% of the world's equity capital for mining and listed more than 30% of the world's public oil and gas companies. Canada is home to more than 400 energy companies who together own about $500 billion in assets as of 2013. About a quarter of these assets, over $120 billion, are located outside of Canada in more than 80 countries around the world. On the mineral side, there are currently more than 1,300 mining companies listed on Canadian stock exchanges, from grassroots explorers to some of the largest companies in the world. The Canadian mining sector has assets in more than 100 countries worth over $250 billion, of which more than $150 billion are located overseas. So that just gives you a little bit of context of why transparency is important and the global reach that Canada's extractive sector has. Now, moving on to resource revenue management, this slide shows that it is shared between different levels of government in Canada. The federal government, our 10 provinces and 3 territories, all collect natural resource revenues such as royalties, bonuses, taxes, and fees. depending on the respective jurisdictions. In total, Canadian governments collected about $23 billion per year from the extractive sector during the last 5 years. The largest chunk of these revenues are oil and gas royalties paid to provincial governments. So, as we have heard from previous speakers, transparency helps to reduce the space for corruption in the natural resources sector by shedding light on government revenues. This is important not only at home, but also in the many other countries where Canadian extractive companies operate. It can also help increase public confidence in governments because citizens can obtain information about how revenues are levied and collected. Extractive sector transparency is also good for business. It promotes a more predictable operating environment that can help mitigate political risk, which in turn may help reduce the cost of capital. Working with other countries towards a common global transparency standard promotes a level playing field for domestic and international companies. It recognizes the positive impact that extractive companies make to these local economies. Last year, as I noted, Canada enacted the Extractive Sector Transparency Measures Act. So this act requires companies that explore for or extract oil, natural gas, or minerals to publicly disclose certain payments made to all governments, both in Canada and abroad. These payments include taxes, royalties, bonuses, fees, etc. Such payments have to be reported if they are worth $100,000 or more to a single recipient. This act was driven by both international and domestic momentum in transparency in the natural resources sectors. Through initiatives such as the EITI, initial efforts focused on helping countries, particularly emerging economies, to put transparency standards in place. Over time, a growing awareness emerged that governments have a certain responsibility for the activities of domestic companies when they operate overseas. This inspired the first attempts to expand transparency requirements beyond a single country's borders. For example, Section 1504 of the U.S. Dodd-Frank Act and Chapter 10 of the EU Accounting Directive from 2012. Meanwhile, in Canada, there was a coalition called the Resource Revenue Transparency Working Group that was founded in 2012, which consisted of major mining associations in Canada, as well as 2 civil society organizations. Well, in fact, I think there were 16 civil society organizations in total, primarily through Publish What You Pay and the Natural Resources Governance Institute. This coalition developed consensus recommendations on a Canadian transparency framework and then lobbied the federal and provincial governments to implement the standard. And this was an incredible piece of work that really helped inspire the federal government to move forward and essentially make a commitment at the 2013 G8 Leaders Summit, where Canada agreed to put in mandatory reporting standards within 2 years. We have implemented this commitment through the Extractive Sector Transparency Measures Act, which was adopted in Parliament last year and came into force this year. So it was important to align with the emerging global standard while ensuring that our rules made sense in Canada and to Canadian companies. The requirements would apply to projects not only in Canada, but also in many other jurisdictions around the world where Canadian companies operate. Throughout the policy development process, we received input from more than 80 Aboriginal governments and Indigenous organizations, almost 70 extractive companies and their associations, and approximately 30 civil society organizations. We also coordinated with partner countries to share advice and make sure that our respective policies meet the emerging global standard. We conducted early outreach with key stakeholders before we announced our commitment in order to assess the feasibility of our objective and timelines. We worked closely with these partners at every stage in the process, which is shown on this slide, even publishing draft documents and consultation papers to get detailed feedback before moving forward. At the beginning, we met with each sector separately to build trust. It took time to build a common ground between the various stakeholders, which not always shared the same views. As we move forward toward implementation, we brought representatives from each stakeholder group into a small working group that helped us sort out the details. And I would just like to flag the importance of civil society here, who wrote to our minister indicating that it was important to have a multi-stakeholder viewpoint in developing Canada's legislation and guidance. And I think that was critical to have that momentum because it really made a difference. Our government heard loud and clear that it was important. The mining sector had already been working with civil society organization, and it was more easily then to work with other sectors and bringing these folks together to develop a common viewpoint and build a consensus together. It would have been very difficult to deliver such policy in a short time frame without the contributions of these many partners. So in terms of next steps, even though the law is now in force, we continue to work with stakeholders to raise awareness about the new reporting requirements and potential challenges on the horizon. In less than a year, people around the world will have access to disaggregated information about payments made by Canadian companies and relations to projects in their communities. We will be carefully watching to see what effect this information might have on how these revenues are managed, both in Canada and abroad. So my last slide. I just would like to speak to some of the key lessons that we have learned in the process. So I think one is to be transparent through the policy-making process. Governments are often reluctant to reveal their plans before a decision is made. And of course, every country has laws to protect the confidentiality of the policy process. However, within these rules, sharing our draft policies helped us identify potential errors and complications early on before the law was adopted. The transparent process also helped build support for the initiative over time. Lesson 2, engage early with stakeholders and other interested groups. Stakeholders have a wealth of information and expertise, and they're willing to share with policymakers. It's important to not forget to ask key stakeholders for their insight at each stage in the policy process. Doing so allowed us to start off on the right foot and to build relationships that were helpful later in the process. Lesson 3, make use of the government's ability to convene stakeholders. Governments often find themselves as mediators between different stakeholders with competing interests. We made important progress when we brought different stakeholders together in one room and allowing each to debate with each other to help sort out a compromise. The last lesson learned is work with other governments to share best practices and ensure complementarity. Public administrators in many countries are dealing with similar challenges at the same time. Working level discussions between Canadian administrators and their US and European counterparts helped us to share best practices and ensure that we're all reinforcing the same global standard. So in conclusion, I hope this case study is helpful to our discussion about revenue management. In Ukraine, as in Canada, I'm sure that there are many different stakeholders who have perspectives on how to manage government revenues. In terms of a best practice, the Canadian experience shows that success in policymaking requires more than simply selecting the right tools. It is also about having an open and transparent process for making the decision. And lastly, I'm pleased to note that this work received a National Public Service Award for Excellence in Policy. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that, Mark. Very, very interesting, and I think that there were some very relevant lessons here from that policy making that I'm sure we'll find different ways to convey to our Ukrainian hosts during the coming days. And if you hear a clear message about not just having this kind of law, but also ITI implementation in Canada, I hope that that will also be followed. Let's quickly move on. Fabi, you often sit next to Mark on the ITI board and now here on the podium, but you represent civil society in Indonesia, also a big and complicated country and a big and complicated ITI process.
Thank you. I have my slides, if you can. Okay, I would like to, I will talk about the experience of Indonesia in managing natural resource revenues, and we as civil society has been involving in this since the, I think since the reform taken place in the late 90s, early 2000s, and we have seen that we have seen that things moving, but still, well, Indonesia, as you mentioned, as Jonas mentioned, is a big country and very complex, and it's not easy for us. We have like 500 subnational governments right now, more than 34 in 34 provinces. So it's a big challenge in to make sure that extractive industry revenue are well managed in this big country. I just give you the picture that how big is actually extractive industry revenue contributed to our economy, and this number are taken from the latest EITI report that just launched 2 weeks ago, 2012 and 2013. Just to give you a figure, so that in terms of gross domestic product, EI revenue contribute around 11%, and in terms of state revenue, it's more than 30%. And in terms of export product, it's more than 33%. So that's you can see that extractive industries are very, very important in our economy. And in terms of the revenue allocation model, so this based on the financial management for subnational governments regulations. We have actually give more opportunity, give more flexibility to subnational government to allocate the fund that they receive. So the basic scheme is actually revenues sharing funds, revenue sharing scheme that I will explain later. But then I just bring you 2 examples from 2 local government, how they manage and allocate the fund that they receive from the central government. First is that we have the special autonomy province of Aceh, where you know Aceh was very famous in the past with this civil war. That's until I think early 2000, and it's given special autonomy. So Aceh provincial government has the autonomy to manage their oil and gas fund. As part of the sharing fund that received from the central government, they got a larger portion of this share compared to the other provinces who doesn't have special autonomy status. So in case of Aceh, the provincial government decided to allocate 30% of this of the revenue flows to the education. In our constitutions, the education is free for the basic and secondary education. But for Aceh, they took forward in allocating the last chance of this fund, of this money, into the allocation from basic education to university. So 30% of this fund allocated for that. So you can see this is just illustrations comparing Aceh and the other production region, which doesn't have a special autonomy status. The second model is like natural resource fund that's also being invented in the sub-regional government, in the subnational government in the region called Bojonegoro, which currently has one of the largest oil and gas productions in Indonesia. So the local government decided to create this kind of the natural resource fund that comprises of basically two functions. First is like for safeguarding funds that will help the local government to mitigate the fluctuation of oil and gas price and the contribution to the local budget. But also the second, creating a saving fund that will ensure that this region will have steal money when their oil and gas productions are declining in the future, in the next 15 to 20 years. So they work, and the local government creates special a number of modalities, including creating or channel this money to build local economy as well. So they made the money available for small credit for the small and medium enterprise, and also invest that money to the different financial instruments. So that's another example of the innovation. So this is actually the main scheme of Indonesia extractive industry. So we have what we call revenue sharing funds. So for oil, gas, and also for mineral like coal and other minerals. So basically, central governments will distribute a portions which around 15% of this fund. There is a different scheme for oil and gas through the producing region. What we mean with the producing region is not only at the sub-national level, means that in the district level, but also in the provincial level. So each, and also surrounding region, surrounding district. So there is a formula that has stipulated in the government regulation, so it's clear for everybody how much a province will get, how much the production district will get. So it's a clear formula in the regulation, right? And this is just I just took this from the government regulation number 5. Sorry for the Indonesian language, but this is to just show you the differences for oil and gas, and also in this regulation is the mandatory for each recipient to allocate a portion for the education. But then, as I mentioned, some region took more effort in terms of allocating this fund. Like for Aceh, for instance, in this regulations, only 0.1% to be allocated in education, in addition to the money that allocated by the central government, because in our constitution, education got like 20% of the annual budget. So this is on top of that. But some other province and regional governments also spend more in this. So there is a flexibility. So this is just to show you that to make these things work, there is a couple of ministries that has to work together. So you have a Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Interior, and also it's through a process to get the figures right every year, and that include in the budget. This is just to show you the cash flow revenue from our oil and gas fiscal scheme, right? You can see that at the end we have a quite transparent model. We use the same model to calculate the amount that local government will receive from the total revenue that received by the central government. So they use the same model, and it's clear for every government, every local government. And with the EITI report, we have produced 3 EITI report. It's become clear. I just tell you, before we have the EITI, local government are very suspicious with the central government because they think that central government cheat on them. They don't believe the number that produced by the central government. there's suspicions that central government doesn't report the correct number, so they got less amount of money. With the EITI, and we have produced the third EITI report, this suspicion is now it's become, well, they're still there a bit, but I think it's more clear for the local government to see how much they should receive. Because based on that number in the report, which they also participate in the process, they know exactly the amount of money the central government receive, and also the money that has been spent to their budget. So this is the number of total revenue allocations that distributed to the local government in terms of provincial government and district government. So we've seen that the number is quite declined because of the price of commodities. So this is my last slide, but there is a two challenge that I think that can be drawn from the Indonesia experience. That first is that you need a robust system, you need a clear formula and modalities, and that has to be understood and accepted by all parties, meaning the central government and the local government. And the second, in terms of innovation in how the money or the revenue being managed and used in the local level, that depends on the first is the leadership of the local government. This is very, very important. Leadership and the capacities. If local government, the local leader doesn't have vision, doesn't have capacity, they will do as business as usual. So, having them engage in the EITI process is very, very key in terms of building the understanding and also the capacities. And we have seen that there is a progress in terms of understanding and how they should manage the revenue. The second one is also very key, is the demand from civil society. If civil society quiet, if civil society doesn't monitor, if civil society doesn't involve in the budget making process, well, you won't get that allocation. So it is very important also to build capacity of local civil society, but also at the same time, government should create a space where this participation can be taken into realities. So it's not only capacity, but also space for that. And I think that's the key of the reform, and I think that's the key of the successful of managing revenue from extractive industry. Thank you.
Fabi, thank you so much for that. And in particular, I hope that, I mean, there was so much of what you said that was very relevant to what Madam talked about. And I hope that you can continue to share some of your lessons, because it seems to me that it's a lot about the same challenges that are really tricky here in Ukraine. There are really difficult issues here in Ukraine. And it seems like some of the challenges, but also some of the lessons and opportunities that start to emerge back home with you resonate well here. So I hope we can continue this conversation over the coming days and so on. Greg, we must push ahead very quickly. Paul Shapiro, you are a senior banker with the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. It is a kind of sister to the World Bank that, of course, has long-standing been a supporter of the ITI in a number of countries. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks. So who's left? I want to speak from in a sense, a little bit of a reality check on where we are. And how do I change the slides here? Now, coming in the focus before the welcome announcement of our perhaps future schedule of royalty reductions was a great bit of concern about how the royalties were hurting production and investment in the sector. And yes, there's a clear trade-off between revenues and investment, or revenues and future revenues. But it's not so unusual for a state to try to renegotiate their share, or for communities to demand a bigger share, indeed for anybody to want more. The question is, can you do it without killing the goose that lays the golden egg? And it's particularly critical because the situation was already terrible. Unbelievably terrible. In terms of attracting investment, there was the opaque application of regulations. You never knew what would apply to you or who would show up to inspect. Processing of licenses, who gets what how, and permits and approvals, a constant source of rent seeking. And the rent seeking is not the type that we're all sympathetic with, where local communities who feel affected want more of a share of things. We're talking about people with authority showing up, demanding payment to fix the problem that they have made, or to allow you to continue to work. This is, really what is at the heart of tying up all growth and production. And of course, the general insecurity is increased because who are your competitors? Your competitors are often insiders to get licenses, insiders from former ministries and politicians, and insiders from powerful people. But at the base, what was behind the whole messed up system is a set of dual pricing. Let's be clear. Ukraine has already had the largest revenue sharing program in the world. It merely shares the revenues before they get to be profits. It shares it on giving away the gas at prices below cost to the public. It shares it on all of these officials who are paid and who get a share, and it's shared on who gets to produce. That is real revenue sharing, but not of the kind that we'd like to see, where a community like Sinchi can have some compensation. This is of a more high level. This rests upon a complete nonsense that somehow the gas is produced in Ukraine is different than gas that is bought elsewhere. Gas is gas. It has one price. It's a world price. And if you give it away at home, you got to somehow replace it again.